Mike Biggs from Mike and Molly is the guy everybody rooted for, and honestly, it was impossible not to. Big, warm, genuinely funny, the kind of cop who still holds the door open and actually means it. And when he finally found Molly, sitting in that church basement at Overeaters Anonymous, nervous and hopeful and completely himself, it felt like the universe was finally cutting this man a break he'd spent his whole life earning. Except it wasn't a break. Not really. What the universe handed Mike Biggs wasn't freedom, it was a different version of the same trap he'd been living inside for as long as he could remember. And by the time you finish watching this, you won't be able to sit through a single scene with Peggy without feeling something tighten in your chest. Because Mike didn't just grow up in a broken family, he became the thing that held it together, quietly, constantly, at a cost the show never once put a number on. Nobody asked him if he was okay with that arrangement. Not once, across 6 seasons. That's the whole story, right there. And it runs deeper than the reason you think. Here's the concept worth holding on to before anything else, because it reframes every scene that follows. It's called the Fawn response, a real and recognized trauma survival strategy first described by therapist Pete Walker, and the mechanics of it are straightforward. When a child grows up in an environment where love feels unpredictable or conditional, they discover quickly that the safest available option isn't fighting back and isn't running away. It's becoming so agreeable, so emotionally available, so endlessly soothing that nobody ever gets hurt or angry enough to walk out the door. Psychologists would also call what happened to Mike a form of parentification and emotional neglect. The child who becomes the emotional caretaker learns codependency not as a choice, but as a survival skill. And the enmeshment that develops between parent and child in that dynamic, a concept family therapist Salvador Minuchin spent his career mapping, is exactly the architecture you're watching every time Peggy picks up the phone. Mike Biggs runs on that strategy, front to back, pilot to finale. It's one of the more quietly devastating things that Mark Roberts built into the show when he created it. A Chuck Lorre production that wore its comedy on the outside while running something far heavier underneath, in the same tradition as 2.5 Men or The Big Bang Theory, where the laugh track has a way of smoothing over pain that probably deserves a longer look. His dad left when Mike was still a kid, packed up and ran off to Florida, and Peggy, played by Rondi Reed in a performance that gets funnier and more heartbreaking the longer you sit with it, was left behind carrying a grief she never processed and a fury she never fully named. What she did with all of that, consciously or not, was pour it straight into Mike. She made him her emotional partner, her buffer, the person whose job it was to absorb whatever she couldn't handle on her own. And Mike, because he loved her and because he was a child who didn't know any different, learned to take it. Every phone call, every guilt trip, every scene the audience laughed at because Billy Gardell's face was doing something incredible in the moment, while underneath the comedy, Mike was doing what he always did, holding everything together so nobody else had to carry it. So here's how it actually unfolded. Remember back in Season 1, Episode 6, when Mike finally puts together a proper romantic evening with Molly? He's planned it, he's hopeful, and the whole thing carries that warm, early season energy where you genuinely want good things for this man. Then Peggy calls. Not once and done, she keeps calling because she's already decided that Molly is a threat and that Mike's attention is something she's entitled to redirect whenever she chooses. Molly is the one who names what's actually happening. She spells it out for him, explains the pattern, and Mike has to make a conscious and deliberate choice to turn the phone off and stay present in his own evening. That's Episode 6 of Season 1, and the detail that sticks is this. The first time Mike Biggs establishes a basic adult boundary with his mother, he needs his girlfriend to explain to him why the boundary is legitimate. Consider what that tells you about every year that came before Molly arrived. He didn't know he was allowed to choose his own night over his mother's anxiety. Nobody had ever told him that was an option. He genuinely didn't know. Here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable, because the Fawn response in Mike doesn't begin and end with Peggy. The same pattern runs straight through to his father. Cast your mind back to the bachelor party episode in Season 2, where Jack shows up, the man who abandoned his family when Mike was a child, now carrying a failing marriage and a guilty conscience and apparently nowhere else to take either of those things. Jack cries. He apologizes to his son, and Mike tells him he loves him and that he's glad Jack will be at the wedding. The show frames that moment as warmth, as evidence of Mike's extraordinary capacity for generosity, and Gardell plays it with such quiet tenderness that you feel it land exactly the way the writers intended. But watch the architecture of the scene underneath the emotion. Jack is the one who receives comfort. Mike is the one delivering it. His father walked out on him as a child, and when they finally sit across from each other as adults, Mike holds the emotional space so completely and so carefully that Jack gets to leave the conversation feeling better. That's not forgiveness operating as strength. That's a man who was never taught that staying angry at someone who hurt him was something he was allowed to do. Zero acknowledgement of what Mike actually lost growing up without a father. Zero space for his grief inside a scene that was entirely about his grief. Season 2, Episode 22, His Wedding Day. And honestly, sitting with this one properly is what shifted the whole show for me. Mike wants his father at the wedding. That's the entire request, nothing extravagant about it. He wants both his parents present on the one day in his adult life that is structurally supposed to belong to him. Peggy responds by telling him to go enjoy his special day with his precious daddy and, paraphrasing because the line runs longer, the woman his father left with. She weaponizes her own pain so precisely and so efficiently that it lands like a closed fist. Mike, holding on by a thread at this point, says he can't cut his father out of his life completely. Peggy's reply is 2 words. Why not? 2 words to tell her son that his wholeness is less important than her wound, that he should erase half of where he came from because her grief requires it. Mike explodes. He says, "What do you want from me?" And that might genuinely be the most honest line Mike Biggs delivers across the entire run of the series. But the explosion doesn't hold. He softens, he absorbs, he finds a way to keep the peace, because keeping the peace is the only skill he was ever really given the chance to develop. Every single time. Here's where the story turns genuinely dark, because the damage doesn't stay in the past where it belongs. Season 3, Mike and Molly are trying to start a family, and things aren't moving the way they hoped. When Mike discovers that his father carried a low sperm count, the reaction isn't simply worry or sadness. He spirals straight to the fertility clinic, terrified that he's inherited the same limitation, and beneath that, fear is something the show skims past without stopping. Mike's first instinct isn't grief about a baby he might not have. His first instinct is that Molly will leave him if he can't provide one. His father left. His mother spent years making love feel like something Mike had to continuously earn through availability and compliance. The lesson landed so deep it lives in his body now, reshaping the way he reads his own marriage. His worth is contingent. His place in the relationship is something he has to keep justifying. He absorbed that understanding before he was old enough to question it, and Season 3 is where you watch it surface in a context that has nothing to do with Peggy and everything to do with what Peggy built. The show played it as a comedy episode. Here's the beat that genuinely finished me off. Season 5. Mike and Molly have been trying for 2 years, carrying the hope and the disappointment and the fertility anxiety through season after season, and Mike's fear that he's somehow the obstacle has been running quietly underneath all of it. And then it comes out that Molly went back on birth control without telling him. She made that decision on her own, privately, while Mike was still operating as though they were in it together. Molly was exhausted and hurting, and there's a version of this where you understand exactly why she did what she did. But the pattern it lands inside is what matters here. His dad left without a real conversation. His mother issues emotional demands unilaterally and expects Mike to absorb the consequences. And now, the person he chose, the relationship he built from nothing in a church basement, made the single most consequential decision in their shared life without bringing him into it. Mike Biggs has never once been the person who gets to decide what happens to Mike Biggs. Not once, across 6 seasons, in any family he has ever belonged to. Here's where everything lands, and the sentences get shorter here because the weight requires it. The series finale, Season 6, Episode 13. Mike and Molly are at the hospital, waiting to bring home their adopted son, William Michael Biggs. This is the night. The family Mike spent years hoping for, the love he found by accident in a church basement, the child he nearly lost faith of ever having. All of it arriving at once in a hospital waiting room. Peggy suggests the baby should come home to her house. Mike and Molly should move in with her. Joyce, played by Swoosie Kurtz, disagrees. The two of them begin trading increasingly ugly insults, escalating past comfort, in the building where Mike's son is waiting to meet his parents. On the night Mike Biggs finally receives what he wanted most, his mother and his mother-in-law are fighting over which family gets to own him next. Then Molly tells him she's pregnant. Naturally, a second baby, unexpected and real and beautiful, and Gardell's face in that moment carries everything the character deserved to feel. Here's the cruelest part though. That pregnancy guarantees both Peggy and Joyce a permanent presence in Mike's household. There's no future on offer where Mike gets to be just Mike and Molly. The circle doesn't shrink, it expands, and the person at the center of it, absorbing, managing, holding it all in place, is the same man who learned that skill in childhood because nobody gave him a different option. The Fawn response doesn't dissolve when you find love. It just finds a bigger family to protect. And Mike Biggs spent the finale of his own show doing exactly what he'd always done. He smiled. He held it together. He made sure everyone else was okay first. Here's the point. Mike Biggs isn't the lucky guy who found love late and landed a warm, funny, happy ending. He's a man who was conditioned from childhood to earn his place in every room he stood in, trained by a father who disappeared without warning, and a mother who never fully allowed him to leave. And when he found Molly and that meeting and that life, the conditioning didn't stop. He just got better at performing it inside a larger cast. The show wanted you to laugh at Peggy, and knowing what Season 5 reveals about her own childhood, her own wounds, and the things done to her before she ever did anything to Mike, it's harder to land blame cleanly on one person. She was broken before she broke him, and that matters. The trauma bond runs in both directions, and what Rondi Reed does with that in the quieter scenes, the ones between the punchlines, is worth paying attention to. What it doesn't change is the shape of what Mike carried, or how long he carried it without anyone noticing the weight. Two families, one marriage, one partnership, one mother who faked a heart attack the first time he went on a date, and 6 seasons of Mike Biggs being the emotional anchor for all of it. Not one scene in the entire run of the show asks who anchors Mike. Go back and watch the pilot when you get a chance. Mike at that first OA meeting, nervous and genuine and showing up in a church basement because he finally admitted out loud that something was missing and he needed help finding it. That version of Mike, unguarded and honest and walking through a door he was scared to open, is the truest the character ever gets. A man who knows something is wrong and is brave enough to say so in front of strangers. Then watch him spend 6 years never walking through that door for himself again, because every door he opened after that one led into someone else's need, and Mike Biggs was always going to step through it and ask what he could do to help. Some people spend their whole lives being the room that other people walk into, and they never quite notice, because everyone always looks so glad to see them. Is Peggy Biggs the real villain of this story, or just a woman who passed her own wound straight down to her son without ever fully understanding that's what she was doing? Drop your answer below, because that's a conversation worth having, and every comment gets read.